Welcome everybody to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're here to discuss the second part of American Jewish history. We went pretty far pretty quickly. We went all the way to the beginning of the 20th century, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But as we do, let's first welcome everybody who's on YouTube. So welcome to Diana and Lou and Ron, Arlene, Flossie, and David, Michael, Stuart, Gilbert, and Arnold. So welcome everybody. We had a really good time last week, I thought, but that may be just me, talking about the history of American Jewry. And again, to give a basic synopsis, the first Jews coming over were adventurers. Almost all were Sephardic. In the 18th century, started to see Jewish communities start to pop up in cities, including Savannah, mostly Sephardic. By the Revolution, by the end of the Revolution, there's about 3,000 Jews in America, almost all Sephardic. 1820s and really 1840s, you see an influx of German Jewry, 250,000. So by 1880, almost all Jews in America, the vast majority were German Jews. They came over, they had been, a lot of them were educated, just like the Sephardic. But then, and that's where we're going to continue now, from 1881 to 1924, you're going to see 2.5 to 3 million Jews come over, almost all from Eastern Europe, almost all very poor. All are educated in terms of literacy, which is a very a big key to the success of our ancestors in America, but most of them came here, worked in sweatshops. Some went and started, went from peddlers to merchandising, going to small towns around the country. And again, for most of us, this is our history. Our history is the Eastern European immigration. At one point in 1920s, 1930s, as high as 90% of all Jews in America were from Eastern Europe. 90% or immediately descended of. And that shows you the influx. Again, 250,000 overwhelmed 3,000. So the German Jews to the Sephardic Jews, 2.5 to 3 million overwhelms, of course, the German Jews. Now, last week we talked about what our grandparents and parents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents did when they came over from the old country. And when we say the old country today, we mean Eastern Europe. We don't mean Germany. Eastern Europe is the old country, mostly the Pale Settlement. And almost all of our traditions are based upon it. And if we had most people in our congregation raise their hand as to if 3 of their grandparents came from Eastern Europe, most people would say yes, if they're Jewish going that far back. I have 3 grandparents, all came from Eastern Europe. One came from Amsterdam. Yeah, so anybody here Sephardic in origin or German, have any German ancestry? I may have Sephardic ancestry. I'm not sure. My grandfather never told us.
I think my father's side of the family, before they left Spain to come to Mexico, there was some Sephardic family.
Very good chance. There were a lot of Jews in Spain before we were kicked out, and there's still a lot. Yeah, so that's a very big possibility.
My DNA of
I
don't know of any direct, I'm still researching all of that, but my DNA says I do.
Yeah, and again, when you do DNA and they do that testing, remember it only goes so far. It can tell you if you're Ashkenazic or Sephardic or German. It can't tell you how far back thousands of years. So, but yeah, most Jews do come from this area, and as we know, the killing of the Tsar in 1881 set off this movement, this exile for a lot of Eastern European Jews, mostly to America, but they went any place they could get: South America, Central America, South Africa, obviously. And it was the irony that the most atrocious moment in Eastern European history may have been the pogroms that came after the assassination of Tsar Nicholas, and that turned out to be the saving grace of Judaism.
Alexander.
If all those Jews had not left during that 40-year period, obviously we know what would have happened in 1939, 1945. So that's very interesting. But as we know, it was quite a burden for all of our ancestors to move to America in this Eastern European one. The German Jews had money. They came here. America was set. They kind of got into business quickly. These Eastern European Jews, although they could read and write, they had very little what you would call non-religious education. Science, math, all of this, they had very little. And so when they came to America, and sometimes the trip could take weeks or months because they had to walk or get a train, or they weren't let off, they kicked out, or anti-Semitism, they're carrying kids, whatever they have, they get here, they send for the kids as soon as they can, husbands coming alone. You know, it was mass hysteria. And so when they came to America, they did find some Jewish organizations willing to help, but still you're working in sweatshops a lot. And even though America was the land of opportunity, you still left what you knew. You left your village where you had a trade and you knew everybody, and at least your life was steady. Karen.
And you spoke the language.
And you spoke the language. Anytime you moved to another country, the generation who moves, the older you are, the more you are going to struggle. So you don't move to America for yourself as much as you move for your kids. And that is really why they moved here, most of them, for the kids, with the idea that their kids could be actually American. And what does American mean? We're not going to speak Yiddish. We're not going to have accents anymore. Some may even get rid of Judaism, but a lot would keep Judaism. We're going to get rid of this old world mentality that religion is, you know, the only thing in our lives, and the rabbis are on pedestals. Who had the most difficult time coming to America? The rabbis.
Rabbis?
They had the most difficult because in Eastern Europe, they're big shots. They're running these shtetls. They're the ones in control. They're the most learned. But when you come to America, that Torah learning is not as important as knowing how to sew quickly, or knowing how to merchandise, or knowing how to
Not
run
getting any
a
sound. I
store.
wonder why.
All those things are. Anybody seen the movie Hester Street?
Yeah.
Many times.
Yeah.
Many
Highly
times.
recommend it. It's a story about a man who had come to America, and he was nothing in Eastern Europe, comes to America, shaves his beard, he looks American, has a little bit of an accent. He is really becoming an American, and he's got a girlfriend. He lives with a rabbi who makes so much less than him because he wants to study, doesn't want to do business, and he's assimilated. And then one day he gets a note that, guess what? His wife is coming to America. So he had left his wife and kid back and had just completely forgotten about him. She gets here, he goes to, it's Ellis Island, I don't know exactly which place. And
Ellis Island.
Can
his
you help me
wife,
with
she's
this?
got the shadel, she's got no makeup on, she looks dreary in these old clothes. She's looking right at him, and she has no
Jonathan.
idea this is her husband because he doesn't have a beard. He looks like an American to her. And it's this, but by the end of the movie, this woman who is so excited about, oh my goodness, you live with a scholar? She's so thrilled. He's like, he doesn't even make any money. And by the end of the movie, she ends up with part of the business and the divorce settlement. And the rabbi's like, who's going to marry her says, well, how do we run this business? And you can see that he's already starting to change as well. So again, we talked about Hollywood last time? Did we talk about Hollywood and medicine and boxing last time? Can't remember if we got that far.
Yes.
All right. Well, while you're in America, the most important thing is, how do you find your niche because there are limits. And Lou, we can see and hear you, by the way, in case you're wondering. Jonathan looking good. So how do you find your niche? There are certain fields that are off limits. You got merchandising is still going to be the best way. You go to all these small towns, you bring connections. The small towns are happy to have a small number of Jews who are not competing for jobs. We're bringing interesting new products. Medicine, I think we talked about how Jews were limited to how many could go to medical school. They kind of cheated, didn't say they were Jewish, but by the time they get out, they know they're Jewish. They can't get jobs at regular hospitals, so the Jewish community builds Jewish hospitals. They have Jewish doctors at these hospitals, and all of a sudden everybody else goes to those hospitals because the Jewish doctors are the best, and so the other hospitals have to hire Jewish doctors. And then you got Hollywood, which is a great example because moving pictures was a nothing entity. No self-respecting parents would allow their kids to go into moving pictures. And when Thomas Edison tried to monopolize them on the East Coast, all these Jews in the movie business moved to Hollywood, moved to California, start Hollywood, and all of a sudden Jews are in the business of movies and running the studios. And it's too late to keep them out because they're already in. And some Jews went other directions. Those who didn't want to go to school, they went into sports like boxing. For boxing, there was no limitations. People would pay to watch people beat each other up. It didn't matter if you're Jewish. Sometimes they liked watching Jews fight the Scots and the Irish. And so a lot of champions in mostly the lower divisions were Jewish. We even had one heavyweight champion. So you kind of go and find areas that there's no competition, that there's no restrictions, and you take advantage. And it's really incredible and a tribute because they had a lot of struggles that we don't have. And as I think I mentioned last time, if they could see how well we've acclimated and acculturated to America, they would be pretty impressed.
Rabbi,
Yes.
have you seen the movie? Speaking of Americanization, this was one of my dad's favorite movies, Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond.
Oh, yes. I've seen the jazz,
Yes.
I've seen all the Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond, Danny Thomas. What was the guy that the most famous of them all in the 1920s?
Al Jolson.
Al
Al
Jolson.
Jolson, most famous entertainer.
He
Uh,
figured
the
that was his-
the Neil Diamond one didn't get good reviews, but the music is amazing. His Coming to America song is one of my favorites. But yes, and the Jazz Singer is a perfect example of this acclimation, this changing of the past to the new, trying to make it in America. And as we know, the Reform movement, and I think we talked about the Reform and Conservative and Orthodox movement, the foundings. Well, in the 20th century, it was really thought the Orthodox movement was going to die out. It really seemed to be in the past type of thing. As we know, that never happened. You had the ultra-Orthodox who ended up huddling in New York. You got Chabad who came. And for most of the probably 1900s to the 1970s, the largest Jewish movement in America is going to be the conservative movement, because they're the movement that invited these Eastern Europeans into their doors. And it really made them the center of the Jewish world for a very long time. In the 1970s, I don't know the exact numbers, the Reform movement will obviously start growing a little bit more, mostly, but not solely because of intermarriage. The Reform movement started to say, we accept intermarriage and we'll do conversion for you. So really, that is where we are today. With the Reform movement slightly bigger than the Orthodox obviously growing bigger, have a lot more kids. Now, as for how we're doing in America, Jews are doing well. There are late in 1900s, we see Jews being posted in cabinet positions, Supreme Court justices, senators, representatives. We see Jews going eventually into almost every field. And we know there were limitations in some fields. We know you couldn't go live in this neighborhood and you couldn't go to this hotel and you couldn't do this. But again, for Eastern European Jews, these limitations were almost comical. I can't live in this neighborhood, which I can't afford anyway, compared to the Cossacks coming in and killing my family. I mean, it's a no-brainer. However, once the next generation or the next generation start to come, that idea may change. And that's what we see happen. You see in the 1930s, the rise of anti-Semitism in America. And it started really, even before, but really after World War I. What was this rise due to? Eastern European immigration. You know, when you have a few Jews and you have 250,000 Jews in the country spread out, yeah, they're more in New York, but they're spread out all over. It's not, you're not going to have that much anti-Semitism because it's just the numbers are so small and we have bigger fish to fry. But once you have large number of Jews, and these Jews look very different than the German Jews, these are very obviously immigrants. And it really stirs some of this anti-Semitism that is latent to, you know, fruition, to the vernacular. And you start to see it mostly in places, again, anti-Semitism is usually going to be higher in places where there's more Jews. Because in smaller places, they're not even recognized, or they're so small a number that, you know, they may be appreciated. So in the 1930s, we start to see this, and you see Jews worrying a little bit, but not too much, because comparatively speaking, it was still nothing. In fact, most Jews supported this gentleman's agreement idea. I can't go to that hotel. I can't go to this neighborhood. I can't go into this business. I can't join this country club. I can't be part of this organization. And most Jews were fine with this gentleman's agreement. Why? Because we didn't want to rock the boat. We're not going to stand up and say, I want to join this country club, because the repercussions are worse than the success. Who cares? And this is the 1930s, and we've seen Nazism rising in Europe and in America. And it's alarming. You have, and again, one of the great analogies I give is Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax, the two greatest baseball players of all time. Hank Greenberg may have been the third, fourth, or fifth best baseball player of all time, except for he's the first major leaguer to sign up for the draft. He signed up on December 8th. And again, he was the best player in baseball at the time, and he served for 5 full years. Came back, was the best baseball player for a year or two, and then age got him. So he lost 5 full years of his career at his prime. And when he is playing for the Detroit Tigers and thinking about skipping services for Yom Kippur, it's a big issue. You know, if they lose the World Series because Hank Greenberg doesn't play in the World Series in the 1930s, Detroit, they're fearing riots. I mean, winning the World Series is a big deal. Detroit's never done it, or maybe, and now their best player. So, you know, there was all these discussions about anti-Semitism. Where in the 1960s, when Sandy Koufax didn't play on Yom Kippur in the World Series, whatever, you know, because there's already the 1960s, and we'll talk about this transition. I think I've told you one of my favorite stories. Somebody else just retold it to me. Don Drysdale, who was a Hall of Fame pitcher, and he pitched along Sandy Koufax. For 5 years, Sandy Koufax is the best pitcher of all time. So it's the World Series. Sandy Koufax is not pitching. It's Yom Kippur. And so Don Drysdale pitches.
Sucks.
And he gets racked. They just keep scoring on him. And so when Walter Alston, his manager comes up to the mound, and Don Drysdale famously says, "You know, Walter, I bet today you wish I was Jewish too." Famous quote.
I never heard that.
And
Yeah.
it's true story, I think. So anyway, in the 1930s, this anti-Semitism is still there. It's gentleman's agreement, but you see it coming to the forefront. And then, of course, it all changes when Pearl Harbor is attacked. Before Pearl Harbor is attacked, the country's going either way. I mean, some of us wanted to support Germany. But once we're attacked in 1941, and now we're at war with Germany, everything changes. And you see 500,000 Jews serve in the military during the war. Men and women and children who are not serving do their part for the war as well. And that is a tipping point in many respects. Because if you serve with someone, most of the people going in the military are like people from the middle of nowhere, farms, south, and they've never met a Jew in their life. And now all of a sudden they're serving with one, and you get to know them, and it's a different story. So 500,000 Jews serve in World War I. After World War II, after World War II, the Holocaust becomes in full view, and we'll see sympathy for the Jewish community. And these two things are going to really set the tone for Judaism in America until recent years. It is going to be a free pass for Jews in America for the most part for 70 years. It'll be there's the levels of anti-Semitism post-World War II until the 20-teens is very low. And increases at times, but very low. And those are the years I was born. Those are the years, if you weren't born, that's the years you lived. So yes, there was restrictions, but they started to lessen more and more. Gentleman's Agreement, a great movie with Gregory
Peck.
Peck. After,
Well,
yeah, sorry, Stuart.
No, go on.
After you, please.
I hear everything you're saying, and I know that we
You
have
may not be
said,
right, so you can.
I'm saying that we have said this and many, many times before. I wonder if at the time of the great Jewish immigration, 1880 to 1920, what was
24.
happening was not that there was a meeting of Americanism and Judaism, but that the Jews were adapting to how to live in a foreign society. It was never presented that way. Jews accepted America. I question whether America ever accepted Jews.
Well, that's a good question. And the truth is, you can always have debates about these things. There's very little debate about is how good America has been to the Jewish community. That is very difficult to debate the other side. I mean, comparatively speaking, America has been amazing. How much America accepts Jews, that's a debate that'll continue forever. But America has something different than most places, and that is a wide variety of people, a much wider variety here than any place else. So in bulk, we have people of different colors and races and religions and creeds from different places. It is very much an immigrant country that had very few traditions before the 1700s, which is unlike most places in the world. So if Jews have not been welcomed in America as much as possible, we've been welcomed more than most. I mean, we've seen anti-everything, African Americans, LGBTQ, women, immigrants, Italians, Scots, Latinos. We've all had restrictions at one time or the other. However, it's generally been less than other places, with the exception of maybe African Americans. Karen.
I mean, the one thing you didn't mention, which I talked about at services in December, is this law that was the Johnson-Reed Act that was passed in 1924 that really curtailed Jewish immigration. So, I mean, that was, it also curtailed Italian immigration, but I mean, that was an example of, there was some anti-Semitism,
Oh,
certainly.
absolutely. There's no question there's anti-Semitism. It was created partly because of Jewish immigration, but because of other immigration as well. It wasn't just Jewish immigration, it was all the immigration of all these people coming over. And it really was a turning point but again, being anti-immigration is really funny in America because we're all immigrants. It just, when did we get here? I mean, that's the only difference. So in 1947, Gentleman's Agreement comes out. It's wins the Academy Award for Best Picture, nominated for a lot of others. And it's ironic because every movie studio passed on it. Why? Because the movie studio heads were all Jewish and they didn't want to rock the boat. Only one movie studio was headed by a non-Jew, and that was Zanuck. And Zanuck, a lot of people thought was Jewish, but he wasn't Jewish. He's actually refused entrance into a prestigious country club because they thought he was Jewish because he was a movie studio head, which is ironic because he wasn't Jewish. And so Zanuck decides to produce this movie, and the Jewish film moguls all came to him and said, "Don't do this. Why rock the? We don't want you rocking the boat." So he did, and that, of course, became a very influential movie, but also indicative of what was going down. Some of these traditional restrictions were starting to leave. And in the 1950s, you still had them, but you had this sense of we're becoming more American. As opposed to Jews living in America, we're becoming more American Jews. And it really sets the stage for the 1960s. As I mentioned, in the 1960s, when Sandy Koufax doesn't play in the World Series, and remember, in the 1960s, just like the 1930s, baseball is the sport of America. I mean, football, basketball are all second-class sports compared to baseball. And there's no repercussions. There's not riots. There are no riots in LA over Sandy Koufax not pitching in the World Series and them losing the game. It's because the 1960s shows what a difference America had become in 30 years. Because when the civil rights, I'm sorry, go ahead.
A question going back a second. Was it because of quotas that they wouldn't let the passengers from the St. Louis in?
Well, the reason the St. Louis, again, yes, exactly. She's talking about the famous St. Louis, the ship that left Germany with Jews and nobody would let them come up onto their, we just had a thing about it. But yes, there were quotas in America started in 1921 and was completed in 1924, quotas for the number of, and basically, again, the Johnson-Reed Act, all it does is changes dates. That's all it does. So before 1921, you were allowed a certain percentage of the number of people in the country. So 1921, you can have 10%, and I don't have the exact numbers, of the 3 million Jews in America. So that's 300,000. Karen may know the specifics.
Oh, it was in 1921, it was set as 3%
3%.
of the foreign-born in America as of the 1890 census.
Right. But so before 1921, though, before 1921, it was a percentage of how many people were Jewish in the country.
No, there were no quotas before 21,
Right.
other than Chinese.
Yeah, there were some quotas actually. They had specific,
Okay.
but they were so open it didn't make a difference, I believe. I'll double check that.
Okay.
So what they did was, and this is what I think, I could be wrong, Karen, is they moved the number backwards. So there's 3 million Jews in 1920. So a percentage of 3 million Jews is you can bring in 100,000 Jews, which is a lot. But they moved it to how many Jews are living in 1890 or 1880. And you have such a smaller number of Jews that that number went down from to 20,000 or less, somewhere around that number. So, but yes, but what happened in the 1960s is everything changes because the young Jews in America have now been here for several generations and they feel American and they haven't felt this anti-Semitism that their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents felt. And so when the civil rights starts to become such a major movement in America, who are the white people with them? Who are the Anglo people with them? It's the Jews. The Jews start supporting the African Americans in civil rights, which is amazing because if civil rights had happened in the 1930s, Jews would not have participated. We were too afraid of what would happen to us. But by the 1960s, we're like, we're Americans. We can protest our country. We can protest our country. Think about our ancestors in 1880 protesting the Tsar. How would that have gone? We know how it would have gone. And so the first generation and maybe the second generation to America still feel this. I can't protest out loud. I need things to be calm. I'm Jewish. I don't want to rock the boat. In the 1960s, we blew up and we did not care anymore about rocking the boats. And so,
Rabbi,
yes, Diana.
would you say in a way that it's similar to the immigration today?
It is hard. There's always going to be different time periods. Today, it's a good question because immigration has become one of those political words. And in different time periods it is, in different times it's not. 1920s and late teens, post-World War I, immigration is a big word. It's a buzzword because there's so many immigrants coming to America. They're taking our jobs. They're doing this. They're doing this. They become the what do we call the scapegoats? Immigration, and that's something that's happening a little bit today as well. Now, is it true? Sometimes there is some truth to it. Often there isn't. It's just an excuse, but that doesn't change what's going on. Now, the difference today between them is we already have quotas in place today. We have very strict quotas in America about who can come to visit and certainly about who can come to stay and who can become citizens. Whereas Karen, said back then, the quotas, if there were any, were very limited. So that's a big difference. So there is a quota system today. However, let's not only think negatively about America in this because there is a quota system in every country in the world that's a first world or second world country. There's quota systems to go into China and Japan, try and become a citizen of Australia or New Zealand or Canada, or get into Europe as a citizen unless you're lucky enough to have ancestry there, or you're from North Africa and your ancestors are there. So like I can't become a citizen in England. I can't become a citizen in Canada. I can't move to Canada. I can't move to Canada unless I get a job there. I get a job at a synagogue. The synagogue represents me. They get me a green card. Then I can live in Canada. And Canada's right next door. Now I can live in Mexico. Third world countries are of course different, but getting into any first world or probably even second world country and becoming a citizen is very difficult. And you need to have family, proof of birth, or a skill that is needed to move to these countries. And so America's policy mimics a lot of other countries' policies. That doesn't make it any better or worse. It just means we're not the only one doing it.
Isn't that kind of crazy if you think about it on a very grand scale, that if you have nowhere to go and everybody owns everything and everybody can keep you out, where do you go as a human being on this planet?
That is now, again, that's a really good question. Now, some places though don't have the quotas. Third world countries are much more open. So if you're going to South America, Central America, or Africa, the Middle East is a little different because of the religion issue, but then you can get into those countries. Like it probably won't be hard to get a work visa in Africa or South America, Central America, depending. But you're right, it is very interesting how the world has changed. Some of it is good. We want to keep, if we let everybody in America, then we're going to be so overcrowded. But what's the restrictions? Again, it's all debated. That's why we have Congress. And sometimes America is more willing. Now, as for Jews coming in, we were not allowed in during the 1930s. After 1930s and 1940s, after a short time, they let a few more Jews in. But there's not going to be another big Jewish immigration to America until probably the last big Jewish immigration ever was in the 1990s. With the fall of the wall, a lot of Russian and Eastern European Jews come into America in the 1990s. The quota system is enlarged to allow a lot more of them to come in. And it's really interesting. Oh yeah, who's asking a question?
Well,
Michael.
Comment. And that is, we talk about immigration quotas, but the truth of the matter is, even when we were a young country, a younger country, we are a young country. And, there was a lot of immigration. There was always a distaste for immigrants. And, we as Jews are focusing on how it affects Jews. But the truth of the matter is, yes, it affected us, but it affected everybody, because those who were here always have hated the newcomers and have always feared the newcomers. It's kind of like a hierarchy. For a while, the Irish hated the Italians, the Germans hated everybody. Kind of a Tom Lehrer line, but the Puerto Ricans hated the blacks hated the Mexicans, and you go on, and that's just been pervasive in American society almost from the beginning. And I think we have to look at that in context.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely that. Again, it's been pervasive in most societies. America a little bit more so because we're an immigrant country. But yeah, it has to do with how many people are coming in and how long you've been here and what are their skills and are they going to be competing with you, and is it a time for... So at times immigration has people just been upset about it. At times they've been violently upset. It just depends on the time period and who's on the politics of the day. So it's a really interesting question, and the same thing it happened to Jews. When all these Jews are coming in large numbers, the anti-Semitism and the anti-immigration hate increases. When smaller numbers, people may be upset that the numbers are so small, it's almost insignificant. Chinese, of course, came in larger numbers. The Italians in larger numbers. So again, you're right. It wasn't just about Jews. It was about immigrants, and sometimes. But by the 1960s, again, everything changes. And we see the full force of Jewish support for the civil rights. We're going to see the same thing, Jewish support for women's rights in the 70s and LGBTQ rights in the 80s. And, openly protesting the Soviet Union in the 80s to bring in the Jewish dissidents. I mean, we're openly doing this, yet sometimes even openly opposing what our country is doing, which did not happen loudly for most periods. And as time goes on, things become so good. We have a Jewish vice presidential candidate, and the polls showed, would you not vote for Joe Lieberman because he's Jewish? And a lot over 90% said we would vote for him because he is religiously Jewish. We appreciate that. Now, of course, he didn't win, but he wasn't, it's president versus president. But again, that type of support was found everywhere. Now, was there anti-Semitism? Absolutely. Anti-Semitism doesn't just leave, it goes underground. And we really didn't see the overt, aggressive anti-Semitism in America that we saw in the 1930s until recent years. And it's, again, they say it's kind of like, what is a 70-year period of, there's a lot of different names for that 70-year period where American Jewry was really doing great without very few repercussions. And only the last 10 years really have we seen it. Now, when we talk about anti-Semitism today, we have to really make it understood that today's anti-Semitism is nothing like in years past. We don't see Jews being conscripted into the army, and we don't see Jews being murdered, and we don't see Jews being restricted in certain fields. The anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, anti-Israel. That is just an excuse for anti-Semitism, make no mistake. But it is, the numbers are increasing every year. We saw what happened, such a tragedy last week. But we're seeing what's happening on campuses, and a lot of it is ignorance. And again, a lot of it is fueled by anti-Semites other places. But we see the fear because the veneration of Hamas and the Palestinians at the expense of Jews around the world is really a strange issue. With the internet, we've also seen people feel comfortable saying anything they want. And it's not just anti-Semitism, it's racism, it's anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQ, anti-women. Don't think there wasn't a lot of that in the last election. Oh my goodness. A woman ran 2 elections, we had women running for office, and both times, there's that just, so.
Rabbi, may I say something?
So please, David.
I just wonder whether it's more than ignorance, because it seems like, maybe there's traditional right-wing, if you will, anti-Semitism, maybe it's anti-Jewish prejudice, but it's not just ignorance now, doesn't it seem that the anti-Jewish orientation is coming out of bigger issues, anti-white supremacy, anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, anti-Western civilization, if you will. And maybe within those, the Jewish thing gets a little more attention because of success of the group or identifiability or organizational or for whatever reason. But it seems like the streams that are feeding the phenomenon are pretty extensive.
Absolutely. And when I say ignorant, I say a lot of people who are doing these things are ignorant, but there are nefarious forces behind a lot of it. There's a lot of anti-stuff in America today, much more than there was years ago. But, anti-Semitism is just one piece of the pie. It gets a lot of news because there's such a history of it, and because we feel comfortable to speak out against it, and because what's happening on the campuses today, using Israel as an excuse, all of these kids are doing terrible things. But you're right.
And this whole silly thing about the Jewish space lasers and the Jewish people run Hollywood.
Well, I wish we had the space lasers. That would be awesome. There has been a huge number of Jews in the movie business since the very beginning. And for many years, you did have Jews who were in charge of all of the movie
Studios.
studio, except for one. But now nobody control. I mean, now there's more Jews there because we've been there since the beginning, and because when it comes to writing and special effect, but again, there's so many people. There's so many people now from China in there and from other places because movies are so respected and everybody wants to be in the business that you got people of all races and all kinds of stuff there. But generally speaking, it's really interesting because people who are anti something will still watch those people in movies. I may be racist, but I still love watching Eddie Murphy. I may be anti Semitic, but Jerry Seinfeld's hilarious. And they see this a lot in places like India. Because in India, there are some very famous Muslim actors that are very popular even among the Hindu population, many of whom don't like Muslims. So it's kind of interesting that I may be a very big fan of this person, even though I don't like the other, because there's exceptions to the rules. There's always exceptions.
In some ways, the exceptions are the rule. If you look and you may disagree, but if you look at NASCAR, which tends to be, the people who follow NASCAR tend to be pretty conservative, but they also are big football fans. And who plays football? 80% of the NFL is black, and they root for them, both the teams and the individuals, and they probably see no contradiction in the fact that they don't like blacks, but they root for them. So whatever.
And it's we're contradictory as human beings, and so
There's this show I remember called Heart of Dixie, and it's about a small Alabama southern town. And there's a former NFL quarterback who becomes the mayor of that town.
wow.
So he ends up dating, a Caucasian woman. But then at one point, the show makes a joke that says, "Oh," he tells her parents, "Are you okay with me dating her daughter?" And then it says the joke about, maybe an interracial relationship, but it's actually the opposite. They don't have any problem with it being an interracial relationship, but what they do have a problem is he played for Alabama and they are Auburn fans.
Yep,
That's good.
that is very real. The dichotomies of being Jewish. I may be Jewish, but if you're playing for my football team, that's okay. But if you're playing for the other team, it's even worse. But again, so what we see today is still that America continues to be an excellent place for Jews. Again, we saw what happened last week. That was a aberration, thank goodness. But what we are seeing is the hatred that you put online or on the college campuses, for most people will just remain normal hatred. But for people on the edges, or the people who are not educated, or the people who are depressed, and they read these things, it will encourage them to do terrible things. And that's what we see. That's the truth everywhere. But still, Jews are, in Georgia, we have a senator who's Jewish, a Democratic senator, and although we're a swing state, we're a little bit more Republican, and we have a Jewish senator. And when people chastise him in Georgia, they chastise him for being a Democrat, which is great. So most of the time, when people criticize Jewish people, it's not because they're Jewish, it's because they're being criticized for something else. But that may change, hopefully it won't. But we see we're in kind of a nebulous time period right now, and hopefully things will get better.
The
All
plus
right.
side. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead, Genevieve.
Oh, one thing is, I guess, advantage or whatever is that being Jewish, you could kind of hide in plain sight if you didn't announce it because of your skin tone. Where unfortunately, African Americans, it's like no matter how nice they dress or what they do, when they walk in a room, they can't change their skin tone. So they still get judged. Or you know what I mean?
That is a very good point. And because we're Eastern European, because we've been here a long time, you're right, it's very difficult to distinguish most Jewish people anymore. And so that is a good point.
I
Uh,
think, oh, I apologize, Rabbi.
No, go, Dana, please.
I think one thing is here, take this. I'm sorry. I think one thing I've noticed also going off what you just mentioned is that, for example, and you mentioned it yourself, Rabbi, when we met in person. Mexico is a very Catholic community, and the fact that they have not only a woman but a Jewish woman, at fact, in a predominantly Catholic community is very historical. And I think one thing that I've also noticed is you may not like her politics of Claudia Sheinbaum, but I have noticed people when they attack her politics, not so much the fact that she's a woman or Jewish.
And that's the best thing about America. And now, I mean, again, as we know, the fringe groups on both the left and right have been empowered in recent years, which is not a good thing. We like them to stay in their holes. But the internet and other things have made it changed the world for some the better and some the worse. So hopefully, but it's imperative that we continue to speak out. Because the moment we start feeling like we are scared to speak out, that is a very major regression going back to the 1930s. Arlene, and I'm sorry, is that Flossie?
I think an issue that time will tell that I'm concerned is our young people, the young generation, because they're growing up now seeing don't wear a yarmulke, don't wear a Magen David, don't draw attention that you're Jewish. And it's how it's going to affect future generations.
Yeah,
It
but
is.
that's,
I mean, that's
that
certainly,
was
that's
mainly
certainly the,
if you travel to Europe. If you travel to Europe, they said exactly what
I never
Flossie
heard
just said.
that. I
Oh, yeah.
never heard that.
that's what I was about to say. In London, most Jews are very careful unless they're in an appropriate set of circumstances with other people about displaying any indicia of Jewishness. I mean,
But
you can be in big trouble if you wear a yarmulke or.
That's in most countries in the world. Not most, I'm sorry, all European countries. If you're in India or Southeast Asia, they don't know what a yarmulke is, or Africa. But if you're in Europe, maybe even you don't want to wear a yarmulke in most places unless you're in a synagogue. And that's just unfortunate. We're in America, we have to really fight against this so America doesn't become like that. Ron.
If you remember the Rat Pack, someone asked Sammy Davis Jr. once, they were talking about golf. And they said, what is your handicap? Sammy Davis Jr. said, my only handicap is being a one-eyed colored Jew. I mean, that is, God, you can never forget something like that. But that's what he said.
Yeah. And again, America was a place where everybody was welcome for many years until 1921. So I think I looked at 1921, and then 1921 is when they started a lot of these policies, and by 1924 they moved back the dates even farther. That's how. But as we conclude, let's talk about what's going on tonight. I think this weekend. Tonight we of course have the Women of Honor dinner, as we're going to honor Arlene We're going to honor Sheila Weinberg as well. Unfortunately, she is not feeling well. So we're going to honor her at a later date. Saturday morning, we're going to be honoring Darren Rodriguez, our custodian of 25 years, as he is going to be retiring this year. Sunday, we have an incredible program at 5 o'clock with Nosh Before. Larry Silverman, former U.S. Ambassador, and Maurice Middleberg, former international aid worker, are going to be leading a talk on Jewish values in international aid. And that is open to everybody, free. And we're going to do before Shavuos. Again, it's nice to have really incredible speakers. So that should be an incredible opportunity to hear about what's going on in the world. And then at 6, we'll have dinner that is paid. 7 will service, and 8 o'clock we'll start our study sessions. So that's this Sunday. And then a week from Sunday, we have the benefit concert for Camp Lighthouse if anybody wants to join us. And then, of course, we'll be having summer Shabbats during the summer and our anniversary service. So there's always something cool going on. But I want to say thank you to everybody again for joining us, both on YouTube and on Zoom. Thank you to Flossie and Arlene and Ron and David and Genevieve and Stuart and Karen and Lou and Claudia and Diana and Michael and Arnold for joining us here.
And Gilbert.
Thank
And
you.
Gilbert. And who else did I forget? I think I got everybody. All right. So we will.
You know that this is one of the who tuned in. This is one of the largest group that we've had in a long time.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. And we always have we usually have 5 to 10, 15 on Zoom, but usually 5 to 10 million on YouTube.
Yeah.
10 million.
Yeah. So we're not quite Beyonce level, but we're getting there.
So, Rabbi, before we end the session, I wanted to ask. Now, I don't know if this is something I need to talk to maybe your wife about, but how for the children's service? So, as you see, you probably saw him on the video. My 1-year-old's almost a toddler now. Are there any activities besides the GEA that I can slowly start
Yes,
getting
we
him
got
involved in?
tons of stuff. We have babysitting on Saturday mornings. We have a once-a-month program for little kids. We have once-a-month program for little kids at Sunday school. So for holidays events, we have PJ library events. Call me later. I'll tell you what the next one is like. So there's plenty.
Thank you.
All right. A pleasure, guys. I hope you all have a great week. I will see you next week. I'm not going to be here the week after, but we'll be here next week as we continue our modern studies. And I wish everybody the best. If you're going out of town, have a great time. And hopefully we'll see some of you tonight as we honor Arlene. So all the best, and thank you for joining us on the Wednesday class that shall not be named.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody stay well, and it was so good seeing
Oh,
everybody.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
I did have
Thank you.
Rabbi, I did have one more question. Not to sound picky, but whoever posts your stuff on YouTube, can they put like a little note in the title of what the class was about
I
afterwards?
probably should do it myself. I sometimes forget to do that, yeah.
Only because when I miss a class and I want to go back, I don't know if you know what I mean? I don't know if I watched it or not. Okay.
Maybe I'll ask him if I can do it. I don't,
All right. If it's too much, don't worry about it.
it's not too much. It's just, I'm not technologically as savvy as I should be.